My name's Mark Griffin. I'm the Director of the Future of Work Institute at Curtin University in Perth, Western Australia. I'd first like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land and pay respects to elders past, present, emerging, and say thank you for inviting me to introduce a very informative, distinguished and interesting panel of speakers, especially on this topic, which after this morning and with our Institute of Future of Work, two of the very big issues employers and employees ask us about are mental health of the workforce and impact of technology. And I think you can agree they've been fairly central themes of the presentations so far. And where the rubber really hits the road for all of those things, looking at the workforce, is the very topic of this presentation and discussion this afternoon, job security. Now, in some ways, it's curious to be making that the biggest issue. We've heard employment is high, and when we look at some of the data, such as the CEDA survey, which covers a lot of people, many people feel reasonably secure in their job. There's been some decline since the GFC, but almost an uptick in the last few years. But that number masks some groups who have really experienced quite a decline in job security, those in technical work and trades, and also some whose job security has increased somewhat, but we're not so sure what the quality of those secure jobs are. So it's a mixed picture on an important topic. Why is job security so important? One is the environment is changing. We've heard a lot about uncertainty, the impact of economic uncertainty on employment and jobs. We've also found that insecurity has quite debilitating effects on people. Not only does research show it reduces performance quality, strains mental health and financial health, recent research shows that prolonged experience of job insecurity actually mars the very aspects of your person that we want so much now of innovation and creativity. And we've tracked people over 15 years showing prolonged experience of insecurity is quite harmful for some very fundamental aspects of being a person. But if the future of not a single job, more than one employer, more than one career, multiple careers, is it all accurate? What is job security going to mean? And I would like to pose three broad requirements for security in the future to the panel. They start with a challenge one and get more challenging as I go on, but I think they are issues for us to think about. What does it mean to have security in employment in this disruptive environment? The first one is, how do we develop skills over a lifetime? We've all heard about lifelong learning and the importance of it. We're going to need mechanisms that go beyond a qualification, a single schooling, a single learning experience. How is that going to work across a lifetime? Lots of things happening, but we're a long way from a lifelong learning experience. Second, wrap around that. Whatever skills we might learn in our lifelong journey, how do we know they're relevant for the jobs today and tomorrow? When I talk to my teenage children, they're pretty clear. They're learning a lot of skills they don't think they will ever use again. I try to argue with them about that, but they do have a point. How do we know that the skills we're telling people they need, whether it's STEM or soft skills, are actually the ones employment is going to provide in the future? We're actually very uncertain about how we match the learning experiences we give to people to the actual needs of the work environment out there. We're going to have to learn a lot more about what work is and how it's changing to make that match. And even if we could do that, if we could predict the future of work, provide the learning opportunities across the lifespan, would that guarantee security for you in your job? Not really. I think we've had examples, questioned this morning about telehealth, how we're not really capturing the possibilities. And the reason put forward was we need to coordinate so many regulations, opportunities, ways of working that we can only apply those skills if we're in a dynamic economy that is doing well. So the three things we need, I suggest, but I'll ask you now to elaborate in a moment, our panel. How do we get the skills in a changing dynamic environment? What systems provide that? How do we know they're actually the right kind of skills, given it's pretty hard to predict the future? And what are the policy settings that need to be in place to create the opportunities to actually use those skills? Clearly, that involves a whole range of education, government, private institutions working together. I'm not sure we can do that, but I think our panel might be able to address it with some real insight. So I'd like to now introduce the panel and ask them to explore some of these issues of work and job security. And our first presenter is Nicole Dwyer, who I'll ask to join us at the table here. And Nicole is the Chief Executive Officer of Work Skill Australia. The second person I would like to introduce is Sally McManus. And Sally is the Secretary of the Australian Council of Trade Unions. And our third speaker and discussant is Hassan Noura, who is an Associate Partner of McKinsey & Co. I think you'll agree this is a really exciting group of people who will have different and important insights on what do we mean by job security, how do we develop it. And I'll start off, Nicole, with asking you, what are we talking about? What is job security? How do we make it happen for people?
Yeah, I guess in my role, delivering employment services across the country, we deal with probably the people on the fringes of employment, those without qualifications, those cohorts in our community who find it difficult to find work. Probably the thing that we know the most is disruption. Yeah, we talk about it in the future. It's well and truly here, and it's already a major issue in Australia, and particularly if you don't have qualifications and you're reasonably unskilled. So obviously increases in casual roles, increases in unstable hours. You don't know what you're going to get week on, week out. Unskilled jobs are reducing in this country, and long-term unemployment, while our unemployment rate's been fairly stable, long-term unemployment is definitely going up across the country. What we also know in our unemployment stats, when we talk about unemployment rates, 1 hour of work in a week counts as employment. So there's this big undercurrent of underemployment going on across Australia at the moment, where a lot of people work, 10 to 20 hours a week, and that's it. Ideally, I guess in the future, when we talk about technical disruption, ideally it'll be removing some of those routine parts of our jobs, and we all get on to do more exciting things. That would be the ideal scenario. But I think the challenge for us is to ensure that everybody in our community is included in what we know as work. Leaving people out of that creates a whole lot of other social issues, costs, people who don't feel part of our community. We'll probably get onto that a little bit more, but that has that sort of big knock-on effect for all sorts of other social issues.
Thanks. Sally, can I ask the same question, but what does job security mean?
Thanks. Hello, everyone. I think that I like to conceptualise job security around two areas. One is if you've got a current job, no matter what that job is, and the nature of whether or not it's a secure job or not, and I'll get onto that. And secondly, whether or not you think your job, no matter the nature of it, is going to be there in the future. And so it's two different types of job security in a way. And it's important to address both, but there's only so much control we might have over the second one. So the first one becomes an important one to address because of all the reasons that Mark went through, the long-term effects of insecure work on individuals, and of course then the knock-on effects to the economy and productivity, where you have mental health problems, but not just that, people less likely to be innovative, also issues in terms of productivity as well. And so I think in Australia we've really normalised the level of insecure work that we have, and we've done that unconsciously, and that we need to get perspective on where we are as a country compared to the rest of the OECD. And so Australia has the third highest rate of non-standard work in the OECD. Now, there's different measures of non-standard work, but really it's effectively people who don't have leave rights and basic job security rights. And so obviously in our country, 25% of the workforce is in casual work, and quite often some people will point to that and say, well, that hasn't been growing over time, so therefore insecure work hasn't been growing. But of course we know there's many different other types of insecure work. So you might be formally working as a permanent employee in labour hire, but effectively you may as well be casual because you can be let go at any time. So the effects for you as an individual and how you see yourself and how you see the world, how you see your own family and the decisions you can make, and your interaction at work is driven by that. The other, and we could do something to limit the number of casual jobs we have by simply ensuring that permanent jobs are not called casual jobs. And what does that do? Well, then, of course, it gives employees, a few extra basic rights that, in a way, for a company, really you're talking about redundancy payments, really, but the psychological effects of that are significant. The second way that we're way out of whack compared to the rest of the world is fixed-term contracts, and the fact that we have endless fixed-term contracts you can engage in. So many sectors have converted nearly all of their workers onto fixed-term contracts. And you see this in the education sector, for example, where people will be just on rolling ones that end on the 31st of December every year. And even though they might be renewed over and over again, every Christmas you start worrying about whether or not it is going to be renewed, and people live with that stress. Again, this is something that's been tackled by the rest of the world, where they limit it in a way that makes sense for business and also makes sense for workers. So about the middle of all of that, sort of the Germans, and that they say you can, if it's a proper project, that's fine, it's a fixed term contract, but you don't have any more than two ones that get renewed or no longer than 4 years. Sensible thing to bring in. So I think that there's a lot of policy settings, like simple ones that have been used elsewhere, that could reduce the number of insecure jobs that we have, that would make a big difference in that overall picture that we've got.
Thank you very much, Sally. Hassan, you are one of the authors of McKinsey's report that took a large-scale look at employment. What did you learn, and what is your view on job security?
That's right. We published a report in March called Australia's Automation Opportunity, which, while fully recognising the potential challenges to job security that could be caused by automation, also tried to outline some of the potential benefits for Australia as a whole, but also for Australian workers. I'd like to sort of maybe, the way I think about job security is actually maybe a slightly broader lens of economic and financial security. The Australian labour market has been characterised by a high degree of flexibility and churn, as my co-panellists have mentioned. For a long time, that was considered a good thing, and it often went hand in hand with rising wages. And so perhaps people didn't focus as much on the rising insecurity aspect of the labour market. One thing that has changed in the last decade is that while the Australian economy has continued to grow, the quality of that growth has declined. And in particular, productivity growth has declined dramatically, and wage growth has basically all but collapsed. The average Australian worker has not seen any income growth in a decade. And I think that adds a much greater level of urgency to job security. It's one thing to sort of be insecure about your job, but relatively confident that if you lost your job, you could find another job with equal or potentially higher pay. I think it becomes a more urgent social issue when people no longer have that confidence. And if they feel like they lose their job, they're either going to get a job that either has the same pay or lower pay.
Thanks for that comment. And it's interesting to raise the idea of confidence, both as a person, as an economy, and there seems to be real doubts about a level of confidence that we have at both of those levels, or a growing sense of declining confidence. Can I bring the point to skills, which has been touched on? It was my next question that I'd pre-prepared, and it's also the very first question that has come through the app of what are the kind of skills that people are going to need in the future, and how will we develop those kind of skills given the changing nature of work and disruption? Who would like to start with that? Yeah, Nicole, please.
I guess in the future we know high touch, high skill roles will be those that are less likely to be automated. We know currently the higher your qualification, the more likely you are to be able to get a job. My comments are probably again at sort of the unskilled, semi-skilled end of the market. I think one of the areas that's a little bit undercooked across Australia at the moment is the area of apprenticeships and traineeships. So the data has shown over the last 5 years we've reduced the number of apprenticeships commencing in this country by 50%. Yet many of those roles are those that can't be replaced. If you think about landscape gardeners, hairdressers, diesel mechanics, you know, those roles are going to be there, yet we're doing less and less of them. So in my eyes, when we've got very high youth unemployment, we need people to retrain who are coming out of declining industries. I think having a very nimble, good quality vet sector that works hand in hand with the tertiary university sector is absolutely critical at the moment, and it's an area we need to put a lot more focus on.
Can I kick it on from there?
Before you do, Sally, can I just say one thing about the app, that if you could look at the app on your phone, if you have that opportunity, there is a chance to vote on a question about what you think the future of work focus should be. So I don't want to distract from your answer, I'm sorry about that, Sally, but not being of a digital native, I'm going to try and mix between these two things and ask you to vote on the app. And also
some of the skills you need, multitasking, see?
Yes,
learning. I just wanted to continue on with what you said. It's been an absolute disaster to allow the gutting of our vet system, our TAFE system, and employers say it, we know it, everyone knows it. The decisions to privatise have led to a whole industry of substandard training as well, where you don't have that public sector anchor, which is a high quality anchor. It leads to this. And alongside that, and alongside the underfunding of TAFE, is where there's competency-based modules that might just be taken, or firm-based training, where people are accessing that type of skills, but skills that are specific to their particular company. And of course, you know, that's becomes pretty redundant if it's not transferable elsewhere. And there's been, alongside the gutting of TAFE and part of it, a move towards that, which has exacerbated the problem we've got.
And if I can speak for a Higher Education Institute for a moment, I think we're all struggling, we are too struggling with how do we provide that on-the-job learning experience, which is the heart of apprenticeship, but the heart of much of the kind of learning that how do we as education institutions, TAFE, employers work together to build those kind of skills. Hassan, do you have a perspective on the skill question?
Yeah, so our research came to very similar conclusions to the ones Nicole was alluding to, which is that with automation, there are certain jobs that are going to be more vulnerable. So those that are manual, those that are routine or predictable, and where a machine can be taught to replicate them relatively easily. On the other hand, there'll be a huge increase in demand for new types of skills, technology skills, working with machines, as well as interacting with people. Emotional skills, social skills will become increasingly important, and higher qualifications will also become more important. And so then I think the challenge for Australia is how do we help the entire workforce progressively upskill and develop those skills that will be in demand in 10 or 15 years' time. And many members of the panel have already spoken about sort of the challenges of education, higher education. One thing I would add to that discussion is the importance of reskilling older workers who have long since left the education system. You mentioned in your opening lifelong learning. It's something that's talked about a lot. I don't think it's something that's done particularly well. And the stats show that very few people actually go back to school after they leave initially, whether that's at the end of high school or at the end of university. But I think part of empowering individuals to navigate a world of increasing job insecurity is going to be to empower them to go back and develop new skills. And I think we might need to think about creative ways of going about that. So one of them is more modular courses, but I think the other big constraint for an adult worker who might have a mortgage and a family is that they can't afford to take a year off to study if they don't have some financial support. And that might be something that may need to be examined. One of the ideas that our report outlined was this idea of a lifelong learning account. So maybe it could be like a superannuation scheme where there are co-contributions from government, from employers, from employees for every year that a worker is employed, and then they could draw down on that fund when they find themselves unemployed and can drive a living wage while they go and reskill. That could be kind of one of the ideas that may have to be contemplated in future.
Well, let's throw a few more of those ideas out there. What can be done? You've mentioned some kind of account, and I think Singapore government has done something along those lines of giving people an account to spend on upskilling. We have a question that I'm sure you've had before on universal basic income. Is that some kind of strategy? What are the big strategies that you can see from where you sit in this space?
Yeah, so, the topic of New Start allowance has been one that's been around for the last few months, and should it increase, which kind of taps into whether we adopt something like a universal basic income, which some countries have. My view is it should increase. People on New Start are living on $50 a day, and I would challenge any of us to be able to do that. And it gets to the point you can't afford to look for work. Keeping a car running is expensive. If you've got a car, you've got a licence, you've got petrol, you're more likely to be able to get a job. So I think there's that balance. While there's some great programs, there's extra funding, there's crisis funding, there's all sorts of things around. I think, we're moving down a track where we make it very, very difficult for people on welfare at the moment to look for work. There's discussions around drug trials and compliance and all of those things. And there's those in our community that really do need an extra hand getting a job, and something like a basic wage and maybe alternative forms of paid work. Are there social enterprise type arrangements? Are there different ways that private companies and government can come together to create work-like opportunities? So, work's not just a pay packet, it's that purpose, that's that contribution, it's that belonging piece that we really need to consider in that picture.
Thanks. Sally,
Yeah.
big ideas for...
So I'd echo what you said about New Start. With the UBI, I think that there, in some of the countries that have introduced this, it's not necessarily the answer to everything, and it can lead to a gutting of the tax base anyway, and not necessarily be the silver bullet that a lot of people would like it to be. And we, remember our big ideas. We used to have a big idea called full employment, and actually meant full employment. So a job guarantee is another way of thinking about it, which really means getting the balance right between what is the role of government in all of this, taking away that sort of fear about jobs by building a system that is going to guarantee that people will have employment. And you could start this. You could start it with people under 25, or you could start it with people over 50 as a way of developing it. And also then being able to plan some of the skills and the training changes that would need to happen. And there's various times in our country we've had really good programs, like the job skills program that we used to have 25 years ago was a pretty good one.
So I might pick a question from the up again, because it touches on some of the things you're saying, and I'll elaborate it a bit too. It says business needs to have a big role in skilling and reskilling. How do we do this? And I'll make the observation that from an education institution, we're trying to get people ready for employment, and we're going to be measured on employability at the end. But when we look at job advertisements and recruitment, the modal requirement for employees is 5 years experience. And my question is, where does that 5 years experience come from? How do we work, whose responsibility is that 5 years? But the broader question to respond there is, whose responsibility is it? Is it business, government, education? How do we respond to that, Hassan?
I think it's a joint responsibility. I don't think any one stakeholder in society is going to be able to do this on their own. There's definitely a role for government and the sort of general publicly funded education system. I think there's definitely a role for employers, although large employers have more resources and a greater capability to retrain workforces, and there are some very high-profile examples of retraining at scale that some employers have undertaken, whether it's Walmart, Amazon, Google, some of those big brands. That's not necessarily going to be replicable in small and medium enterprises, and so that then creates that's where government can step in, it's where education institutions can step in, it's maybe where sector councils can step in and help sort of provide training that meets the needs of a larger group of employers that no one employer could be able to provide on their own. And then finally, I'd say that there's also a broader role for just government in I think rejuvenating sort of the competition agenda and productivity agenda, because strong economy where productivity is rising has, for the vast majority of Australia's history of the last 30 years, gone hand in hand with higher wages and people feeling more economically secure, even if they were indeed changing jobs.
Any further?
Yeah, just to say that employers, I don't think, will do it unless... Not all employers won't do it unless there's a clear incentive for them to do so. And if they think they don't need to, well, then they won't. And so there's other good examples in other countries also where there's been systems where sectors and industries have got together, the workers and the employers, and dealt with it as an industry or a sector level. And I could see, for example, in Australia at the moment with the NDIS is such a good example in the disability sector, where it's facing so many challenges in terms of workforce capacity, in terms of skills, all of those things. And that's been left to a whole lot of small organisations to try and sort out. And then it's put back on the individual worker. And as San has already said, that some of the difficulties around all of that too. Like, there's clearly a need for a sector or industry plan there, and that needs to be worked out with the workforce, like not without the workforce. And so getting unions and employers with the assistance or the incentive of government to do that would be, a sensible way forward.
Perhaps the biggest growth area looking ahead is in aged care and other care services. Where is the coordinated employment skills response to that fairly empirically evident need? Yes. Nicole.
Yeah, I was just going to say, probably the best examples we see across the country is when government and industry and providers actually work together as a collective. There's a growing need to, I guess, acknowledge that younger people entering the market are struggling to find employment, and using things like internships and I guess just to give people exposure and work experience in different sectors is definitely helping those people move through. Great examples are parity funding, for example, that is provided to employers across the country to increase Indigenous employment. And, we see some great projects. Woolworths has employed thousands of Indigenous Australians over the last few years, and that's industry driving it, but with some government assistance. So there's lots of good examples, there's lots of good programs, but it's helping, I guess, getting, for every unskilled job, there's 11 applicants, 8 are already working, 2 are new young people, and one's a long-term unemployed person. And how do you get those two young people to the front of the queue is the challenge.
Okay, I'll open up some questions to the audience here. If you raise your hand, and we'll find you, I'll read out one of the app questions while we're doing that. And when we come back, if you give your name and any affiliation before the question generally. But I'll read out this question exactly as it is. A number of us here are public servants who often work across a broad range of areas and don't necessarily have deep technical skills. That's what it says. Do you think we are at risk in the future, given future workforce needs? So public sector, a huge employer across not just professional services, but administrative services. What is the future role of that demographic of the workforce? Okay. Yes, from a...
So in our research, we looked at the potential impacts of automation across different sectors, including the public sector, and absolutely right, the public sector is not immune, and the potential for automating various tasks across the public sector is as high as it is in any other sector, but some more so than others. So it really depends. Are you sort of frontline? Are you back office? There's certainly more vulnerability in administrative functions, but a growing demand for frontline service workers, whether they're aged care, disability care, teachers in education. And so I guess it really depends on the type of job that you're doing in the civil service. Mm-hmm. And I think the public sector employers, just like their private sector counterparts, are going to face very similar issues. They're increasingly being called upon to do more, deliver more with less in a growing kind of environment of budget constraints. And the public sector can actually help role model what does best practice retraining and reskilling at scale look like, and help maybe set the benchmark that private sector employers can then hopefully feel pressure and pride to emulate.
Thank you. Do we have someone with the microphone in the audience? Please. There's microphone one there. Thank you. This one right at the front.
Stephen Walters from New South Wales Treasury. One of the areas that Australia often gets criticised in our education system relative to the rest of the world is the real or perceived chasm between the vocational training system and the university system. Like I'm told the German model, young people can start in the vocational system, move into industry, move to a university, then into the workforce permanently, and it's almost seamless, whereas we clearly don't have that. What needs to change to make that transition much easier or possible?
Let's make it.
We have an educator with us, so maybe Mark's best place to answer this. But we had a lot of conversations with the education sector during the course of our research, and one theme that kept emerging was the need for greater agility between these sectors. In fact, in some ways, this arbitrary sort of split between a vocational and a kind of academic track, maybe it made sense in the 20th century. It may no longer make sense, and maybe there's a need for us to think about things in a much more agile way. Maybe you could be in a vet program but need to do some theoretical classes. Maybe you could be at a university but need to do some vet classes. And then maybe we need to completely rethink the structure of degrees and diplomas altogether, and maybe they need to be much more integrated with apprenticeships. Maybe they need to be done over a longer period of time in conjunction with a lot more work experience. We launched our report at the University of Technology, Sydney, actually, and the Vice-Chancellor of that university is a big proponent of wanting his students to think about UTS as being their lifelong learning partner. He said, I don't want them to just come here, do a 3-year degree, leave and never come back. I'd love it if they actually came back every year and took a class here. And so those are some of the ideas that may have to be explored in a world where skills are going to constantly be changing, and people are going to have to constantly reskill in order to, be employable, and not just employable in any sense, but employable in a high-quality, well-paying job.
To reinforce that question, perhaps I'll now read out the response to the poll. I'm not sure if we can show it up there, but I'll read out the main responses to what should be the focus. The highest, with 43%, was collaboration and partnership between business and the education sector. Half the people are saying that's what we need more. I know in my experience as a applied researcher working with organisations, it's our mission to do such a thing, but it creates challenges on all sides of the equation. Number 2, vocational education and TAFE. That's the solution. And one of my teenagers is very keen on a vocational course, an apprenticeship, partly because her parents are both academics. I'm not sure if that's a scalable way of pushing people into apprenticeships, but certainly people asking children in high school, and my kids are really asking the question, what am I learning? What are the skills? How am I going to use that? It's not necessarily a particular degree or qualification. Number 3, better lifelong learning through current employment. I think that comes back to the business role to play in the jobs we have. And maybe this can lead us into the next topic. 1 in 10 people saying, building a broader awareness and understanding of opportunities in technology, such as AI and automation. Okay, most of the scare stories and the utopian stories come from the possibilities of AI, automation, machine learning, or whatever name we give to the magic that's going to happen through the digitalisation of the workplace. How do we capture the positives and avoid the negatives that are presented to us all the time these days? Who would like to? Sally?
I might start by saying, like, I'm a cynic when it comes to all those futurists, which I find that they're all the time saying that all the jobs are going to go and they're all going to disappear. And I don't think that you guys will tell me the empirical evidence backs that up at all anyway. Isn't workplace participation at its highest? And there's more jobs than there has been before, and actually technology has been creating more jobs. And so, of course, some jobs changing, but also this has been happening for a long period of time. It's not some new thing either. And so I wonder how much there's an industry out there that's getting a lot out of beating this up in a way that it does drive a lot of unnecessary fear too. Having said all of that, like, we do know, of course, that what's happening is that there's a hollowing out at the middle, and so the loss of the manufacturing industry and the new areas that aren't going to disappear or in the foreseeable future that are building mainly in the care industries and the service industries, it's not inevitable that they're going to be low-paid, insecure jobs. A whole lot of other jobs started off as low-paid, insecure jobs, like manufacturing jobs. So I think that it's also a matter of making sure that the balance of power is right too, that you've got those actual workers having the power they need in order to be able to have a voice in their own future, have a voice in terms of wanting minimum qualifications and being able to drive change themselves rather than waiting for it to come down from above or not come down from above from their employer or from governments.
I just might highlight some other reports that speak to, as well as the great McKinsey report, but I think Accenture have published a report really emphasising that hollowing of the middle where skills are coming from, and the Deloitte report really contradicted the early economic predictions of disappearing jobs to say there'll more likely be increasing numbers of jobs. What they will be and how we will get there is different, but it's not a disappearing of jobs.
Yeah, I echo Sally's views, but I guess most businesses here would say they're all trying to do more with less. And if anything, you're just trying to keep ahead of the curve. So what I find, most people are looking for those efficiencies, the automation, so they can get on and do other things. And it doesn't necessarily relate to job losses, just different tasks and the things we want to get busy doing rather than less of that. And I agree. I think there's a lot of beat up about it, but it's not going to be some big disruptive thing. We're right in the middle of it as we speak, and it's been a gradual change. But even in the manufacturing sector, we've seen most of those workers move back out into the workforce and do well. Are they getting paid the same? Have they got the same secure employment? Probably not. But it's, I don't think it's as disastrous as what it's been painted.
So, possibilities in the future, for who? Is it for everyone? We've talked about the hollow middle. Some groups are certainly losing jobs and needing to move to others to stay in employment. What's happening? Are we becoming fairer or less fair through automation technology? Sally?
Well, clearly we know that inequality is getting worse, and that we know that's both wealth and income, and that's part of this story, but not all of the story that we're talking about. But going to some of the points you were making about people feeling as though they're not sharing anymore, and the promise of, well, if we're going to have workplace change, there'll be a benefit from you in higher wages and better skills. And the fact that at least for the last 10 years, but in some industries, people will say they've felt that this hasn't been the case for probably even 20 years. The enterprise bargaining system was meant to be like the vehicle for delivering that. Anyone here who's involved in negotiating agreements will know that you don't have those discussions when you're talking about enterprise bargaining or bargains anymore. You're not sitting down and saying, okay, we're going to have a grand bargain around what we're going to need to do in terms of increasing productivity, and we're going to pass it back to you. That did happen at the beginning of this reform that we had 30 years ago, but it stopped happening. And it stopped happening for a whole lot of boring technical reasons, really, which I won't go into. But it's really saying that we don't have those drivers or the system or the architecture anymore to drive that. And in the absence of that, what's happening is, well, of course, those gains of productivity are going all one way. And where that continues to happen, it's not a social good. It'll lead to a whole lot of other problems and a lot of resistance at a workplace level and elsewhere, and resentment around change and around technological change.
Any questions more from the audience? Please, because if you don't, I'll have to read out the next question, and I don't want to ask it. Thank you. Do universities have a responsibility to ensure graduates are job ready? So,
thank you. Amber from the Institute of Company Directors. I've been listening to a range of people talking about statistics, women's workforce participation, and the immense impact it can actually have on GDP if we really harness that as a resource. I saw some stats many years ago when I was working in diversity about how Australia was ranked up towards #1 in the world for educating women, but ranked much further down the list when it comes to engaging women in the workforce continually throughout their life, and also remunerating them fairly. Does the panel have any thoughts about how we can better utilise women as a resource, and both what business, the community sector and governments can do?
I would go first of all. Well, also, of course, we've got one of the most gender segregated workforces, and that's part of the reason why that we've got the type of equal pay gap that we've got, 14%, which really isn't moving too much, because also we've got, women are concentrated in some of those new jobs we were talking about in the care sectors, and their work's undervalued. And so there's things that can be done to change that, and that there are things that can be done in terms of workplace laws, and that then makes a difference in terms of how we value jobs and see jobs, and certain skills as well. Is to say that, someone who is supporting someone who's got multiple disabilities is less skilled than someone who is working in some of the manufacturing jobs that have disappeared.
Increasing participation, given the changing nature of work, which on the face of it should be much more blind to the physical capacities of what people can do. But is that actually changing? I see a lot of control rooms that are still fairly male-centric, even, and historically have been like that, but it's more digitalised work. Nicole?
Yeah, I guess, again, my comments go with the unskilled sector. We're definitely seeing better programs for getting unskilled women into work, and we're seeing a lot of employers who are taking women on in more non-traditional areas. So there's actually a real drive construction, from transport, from those types of industries. They want that balance, and they're putting a lot of very proactive employment programs in place. So, there's women in steel programs, women in construction programs, and they want to get that balance in some of those more, male-dominated industries because they know it's good for their business. And I think it's getting there. Are we there yet? No, but there's definitely, in that space, a lot of good work going on in there at the moment.
Can I ask a question about work, non-work? We all know work is impinging on our lives 24 hours a day. How do we rethink what work is? And do we have some different perspectives on how we manage this, what is becoming a 24-hour life cycle system of work, where we're accessible 24 hours a day?
If I take a long-term historical perspective, the statistics actually do indicate that we're working less than people were 100 years ago, who basically spent all their waking hours working in one way or another. And so there is definitely a role for technology to make our lives easier and to allow us to have more leisure time, if that's the collective choice of society. Of course, that's not the inevitable outcome, but that's the conversation that workers, employers, government could and should be having.
And yes.
Can I tell you this funny story about people in Sweden? So these are our colleagues, so union officials in Sweden, and when it gets to their public holiday, their annual leave, which they always take, they don't answer any of their emails whatsoever. When they get back to work, they just go through them all, delete the whole lot.
I have heard of... Is anyone doing that here? Yes. Who is not answering emails and deleting them when they get back? So I have heard of a few people at least putting that in their email response that your email
Mark, maybe I'll add from a bit more of the consulting hat on rather than the automation research. I think that while employers have been talking about flexibility in the workplace for a long time, and it maybe took a little bit of a while to take hold, I think we're seeing workplaces become increasingly flexible, giving workers the opportunities to do part-time, 3 days a week, 4 days a week, reduced hours, work from home days. And so I think that's progress. Is there a long way to go? Yes. Uptake of these things are still kind of at the low end. There's still maybe many workers who feel uncomfortable taking or advantage of these options, even though they exist. But I think that's slowly changing and can hopefully create an environment that allows workers to sort of strike a better balance between their career and personal aspirations and make jobs sustainable for themselves and their families. Still a long way to go, but my sense is there's momentum building in this area.
Thanks, Nicole.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think it needs to stop in terms of the fact that we have, we just had some big conversations about mental health in the last session, and I think this is one of those contributing factors. We've got very time-poor parents. We're seeing rising incidents of mental illness in young people, and some of that's the bad aspects of lots of tech, and on it, no downtime, no decompressing, and that busyness of families, I think, is one of those big contributing factors to mental health rates in Australia. So I think any strategies employers have around downtime, turning off, needs to be strongly looked at.
Thanks, Nicole. We have what I think will be the final question.
Thanks for that. Michael Polton from the Committee for Ballarat. Can we go to the other end of the spectrum? And we're talking now about lifelong learning. We're talking about our ages continuing much longer into the future. Where does the panel see some of the issues for employers around 60s and 70-year-old workers and what they can bring, and importantly, some of the ways we need to perhaps overcome the barriers to those in latter years of life entering, maintaining and continuing their workforce?
We deliver programs ourselves for older workers, and they're generally those that have fallen out of the workplace. So for those who are looking, helping them find work is probably one of the big things that you need to do. So, you know, where's all the jobs gone in the paper? We've got to help people with their digital literacy and their ability to even know what's available, and that confidence to do it. So I think older workers can contribute greatly. There's pressure, obviously, with the rising age before one can get age pension, and that's going to continue to go up, that we have to keep our older workers in the workforce. You know, I think there's some clever ways we could look at, you know, maybe less tax or something after certain ages, and so there's more flexibility for people to keep working but not as many hours. You know, I'm sure there's some great big policy debates we could have in that area, but there's a lot of good retraining, but digital literacy is probably one of the areas we see needs the most attention for that group.
Any other questions, responses to the ageing? We might have one more question because a little time before this session wraps up. And when I had a quick chat to the panel beforehand, there were so many issues coming up around this topic that I know we've only scratched the surface of some. So with the older workforce as an example, how can we be not making the use of everybody's skills at this time when we need so much innovation? Explain that. Can you explore that paradox a bit for me? I hear we need new skills, we need thought, we need innovation. I know lots of old people who can do that, but we're not connecting them to the workplace. How can we do that?
Yeah, we need to do it. I mean, you know, young people need great mentors and there's great experience out there, and how do we bring them together? Even, you know, small things. We deal with a lot of young people who don't need to get their driver's licence, and they don't know anyone in their life that has a car or a licence to get their logbook hours. You know, can we use older people to help with that? I love talking to Uber drivers. You know, they're often semi-retired, retired people, not quite ready to retire, and they jump in the car and they got great tales and they contribute and they love doing it. It's flexible. So I think if there's some flexible ways we can connect older people with younger people, I think it could be some very innovative programs that we could run.
Yeah, the retired paratrooper gave me a very safe drive to the airport coming here. Any final comments on involving people?
I think it's going to be a challenge across the board. I mean, I think different cohorts are going to have different challenges. Older cohorts are going to potentially need more help than average to sort of, you know, learn those new technology and digital skills. Younger people are going to need kind of more help sort of getting the kind of first round of experience and on-the-job training. You know, women will have certain, you know, specific challenges. People with disabilities will have other challenges. I think that the opportunity is that stakeholders come together in a coordinated fashion to kind of tackle this holistically, so that regardless of where you are in your life cycle and in your employment and in your career, you have access to intelligence on kind of where is the demand for jobs, what are the skills that are needed, options, flexible options on how to get that training, and then support to get into the work. And I feel like that's potentially a skill set that perhaps we've lost, that sort of kind of holistic career guidance and support and empowering people to sort of proactively manage their career in a world where, as you said in the introduction, people are going to be constantly changing not only jobs but entire professions. And so we may need to invest more in kind of professionalizing the entire industry around employment, retraining, reskilling, re-entry into the workforce.
Thanks. I think that's really great comment to finish up on, particularly the idea of so many stakeholders have a stake in the future of jobs and work. Many of them are here today or on the panel. So I think this is a great opportunity to think about what the responsibilities and connections between those stakeholders might be. But we will finish up because we're going to have Dr. Jim Chalmers, the Federal Shadow Treasurer, speaking soon. Before that, though, I really very much want to thank our panel for their insights, sharing so many of their thoughts. Nicole, Sally, Hassan, thank you very much.